think last time we didn't start until like almost 10 past by the time people logged on, so just wait a few minutes. Julie, can't see you. Move in or something.
What's the matter?
Do you want to move in?
Well, we're gonna wait till the meeting to start, so. Cause I'm like, I'm gonna chug down this water any minute.
Have you logged on to any other meetings we had?
What was that?
Have you been on any other meetings from home that we've had?
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I think we're still waiting just a few moments, so sorry for the delay. I just want to allow people some time to join us. I think most of the folks on the call may have met each other previously. Hi, Ralph. Thanks for joining us.
How you doing?
All right, are you hanging in there?
Hanging in there.
You've been busy.
Hey, Ralph. Yeah, how you doing? A little bit.
So I just want to remind everyone we are streaming live as of 6 o'clock. So as of now, just so everyone knows that. And Aaron is ready to roll with the slides on the screen. Awesome. 6:03, that clock is fast.
Yeah, some 10 minutes fast, you know that.
I didn't know that. Hello, everyone. So we are at 5 past 6, and I'm going to go ahead and get us rolling just to get everything moving forward. Just give me one moment. There's somebody asking for the link, so bear with me one sec. It doesn't have it. So, okay, let's get this going. And send.
Which, hey Frank, which power bar did you have?
All right, so without further ado, we're gonna get started. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I think I've met most of you, but my name is Elle Baker. I'm the Open Space and Environmental Planner for the City of Revere. Welcome to Hazard Mitigation Workshop number 1. This is a public meeting, and we do hope to acquire some feedback and information from residents and stakeholders around the city. There will be also opportunity to comment on the documents from this meeting, which will be posted on revere.org within the next few days. So thank you again. We'd like to say thank you to MEMA for providing the grant funding for us to do this planning, and also to Mayor Arrigo for recognizing the importance of resiliency planning that is very much needed to protect our city. And also to the project team who's been tirelessly reviewing documents and older plans and more recent plans with our MVP study for our recognition there, and also for the Route 1A resiliency study, and also for the Riverfront Master Plan study, and the MVP action grant, which is for a resiliency study for the Point Pines and Riverside area. So a lot of work has been done in small pockets, and we're bringing all of that together to make sure that it's all captured under this one report. So I just wanted to make note of that. Again, everything will be posted on revere.org within the next few days under the project hazard mitigation planning. So just some housekeeping. We are streaming live on Revere TV and on YouTube, and that began at 6 o'clock. This will be a webinar format meeting. I ask everyone to keep your mics on mute unless you're speaking, just so we can avoid some background noise. And if you would like to speak, if you can look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little hand. It says raise hand. If you could just click on that button, I will keep a tally of who has their hands raised, and we'll try to call on everybody in order. So if you do have comments or questions and you want to pause the presentation, please just raise your hand and we'll make sure to call on you at the earliest possibility to avoid any interruptions. The materials again will be posted, and this meeting will conclude promptly at 7:30. So I thank you all for your time. I know this is your evening time with your families, and this is a really important planning session, so we do hope that you do participate and that you learn about what we already have planned. The city staff and stakeholders are listed on the screen here. We'll have opportunities to review the documents as well. I'm here with Julie Demaro, our transportation planner, and also Frank Stringy, our city planner. And we do have a number of other city staff on the call, and that have also been participating in reviewing documents. So if they're not here tonight, they still have been participating if you see them on the screen. So thank you all, and I would like to turn it over to our fearless leaders, AECom, Aaron Wynath, and I'm sure some of you may have had the opportunity to meet him with the MVP planning and some of his staff. So I'm going to turn it over to him so he can give us an update on what is the planning, what does it mean, what is the hazard mitigation plan, how does it benefit the city, what have we done before. We've gone through this exercise in 2015, and this is an updating exercise, so we will review everything that has been done in the previous plan, as well as make new additions. which we're in the process of doing now, and then we'll move on from there. So thanks again, and I will turn it over to Erin.
Thank you very much, Elle. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight. As Elle mentioned, I've had the opportunity to meet with several of you in person before everything kind of played out over the last year, and been involved with a lot of virtual meetings like this related to some of the resilience efforts for the city, as well as the hazard mitigation plan, which is the subject of tonight's meeting. My name is Aaron Wynette. I'm the project manager for AECOM for the hazard mitigation plan update. I'm joined tonight by two of our team members, Anna Foley, who will be presenting a lot of the material tonight, as well as Amanda Shanahan. And this is an overview of the agenda that we'll be going through tonight. All of the individuals that were on the previous slide, the local plan, hazard mitigation planning committee, they've seen a lot of this content, so it'll be a refresher for them. But for some of you who are participating, you may not be very familiar with the hazard mitigation planning process. So we're going to walk through some of the fundamentals and background about why we're doing this. I think Elle framed it nicely, but we'll provide some of the process that's involved with it. And a big element of it, the overall planning process, is the stakeholder engagement and outreach. So this meeting here tonight is very important to the plan. It's a very inclusive process where we want to hear from the stakeholders, from the public, get their input on the plan as we're in the early stages now and throughout the development of the plan. As Elle mentioned, you'll have the opportunity to review draft products later on. So with that, I'll start digging into some of the additional opening remarks. So again, what we're here talking about is primarily natural hazards. There's a lot of different hazards that are out there, but we're really focusing on natural hazards. Think flooding, hurricanes, nor'easters. They're a part of the past. You guys have experienced them more frequently in recent times than in the past, perhaps, and they'll continue to be a part of the city's future. And damages can be significant, and the city has experienced a lot of issues in the past for both disaster and recovery efforts that they've had to go through, and they've been being proactive with a lot of efforts that are ongoing with the city. A lot of resilience measures are underway or have been implemented. And this is really looking at what else can be done and assessing the city's overall risks. And also, dollars are stretched thin, and, federal funding is there to help to some extent, but it's kind of the purpose of this is to try to prevent and reduce future risk, so those damages can be reduced over time. So I guess a simple goal here that we wanted to present in front of you is that the overall objective of this hazard mitigation planning process is to really make the city more sustainable and more disaster resilient going forward. So how do we do that? This mitigation planning process really helps set the course for that. We look at identifying the hazards, the risks that the city has, and the assets and the residents, and then developing the action or the strategy for the plan. What can the city do and plan for to reduce the risk going forward? And then implementing those actions that are in this plan. This is going to be a live document, something that the city will be continuing to update, and we'll be keeping track of the progress going forward. So those are kind of the opening remarks that I wanted to offer up. And now I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Anna Foley, who will provide some more of the background and really kind of hit home why this process is important. So again, thanks for your time. And with that, I'll turn things over to Anna.
Thanks, Erin. Hi, everybody. So as Erin was mentioning, clearly you guys in Revere aren't strangers to the natural hazards that impact you regularly: floods, hurricanes, winter storms, the list goes on and on. Sometimes a subtle or not so subtle distinction is the terminology that we use to talk about those events. Hazards versus disasters. And a lot of times it's easy to kind of fall into a trap of using them almost synonymously, but they're really different. The natural hazard itself, the events itself happen. And what makes them a disaster is the fact that people and property are often in the areas affected by those hazards. So, the magnitude of an event and a community's resiliency are tied to, what people and property are in affected areas and what can be done to make improvements or to mitigate so that when those events do happen in the future, they're not impacting the community as strongly as they sometimes are now. Next slide, please. So again, hazard mitigation being that key to resiliency. We can't turn back time and not develop certain areas that are already developed, but a lot of mitigation is looking forward. What could be done in terms of building codes or building planning to make different decisions about where things are going or how they're being built, and then also looking to the existing environment and, well, the built environment, to see what could be done so that when the events happen in the future, the buildings are not affected in the same way. In other words, do you elevate a building so that the floodwater goes under it instead of through it? Next slide, please. And again, so hazard mitigation is, they're the activities that you take to break the cycle. Typically, the disaster happens, the response phase occurs, everyone recovers, prepares for the next event. And without mitigation, you just kind of go round and around and around that circle. But Aaron, if you click for the, thank you. By incorporating hazard mitigation into the everyday activities of a municipality, those hazard events, when they happen, become disasters less and less often. So you implement hazard mitigation measures, it lessens the demand on emergency response. There's less damage to recover from, respond to, and there's less to kind of prepared for to get ready for the next event that happens. And this mitigation planning process is intended to be undertaken to identify what are those hazard mitigation measures that make the most sense, and have the planning activities undertaken when you're not in an immediate response phase where everyone is kind of thinking about the most recent thing that happened and let's respond to that. It's really intended to kind of take some of the emotion and kind of knee-jerk reactions of what mitigation has sometimes been through the years, and look at everything really with the data behind it to see what is what makes the most sense, what is the most that can be done with limited resources to have the greatest impact on Revere's resiliency. Next slide, please. So again, and it works, by reducing exposure, you're saving money and protecting lives and property. Next slide, please. Okay. And again, when you have hazard events that happen, the economic impacts and the impacts to the just the social fabric of the community, depending on the event, those aren't small. Above and beyond, the immediate damages, the more severe events just have the potential to really upturn the day-to-day lives of a lot of people. And then you have to deal with response time and costs. And, by doing this plan and keeping it current as the city has been, it allows you to always incorporate the latest conditions in the city, as well as the most up-to-date technical information, so that you're constantly making informed decisions on where things are headed. Next slide, please. Now, hazard mitigation projects, they do cost money. So some of it is, kind of, you think, gee, does it really make sense to put all this money into these projects when maybe that event that we're planning for isn't going to happen anytime soon? The Multi-Hazard Mitigation Council, which is part of the National Institute of Building Sciences, recently updated an assessment that they had done looking at federal benefit cost ratios for hazard mitigation projects for different types of hazards. And they found that, overall, natural hazard mitigation projects are returning 6 to 1 on investment. So the benefits far outweigh the costs. And this was a nationwide study, again, for a series of different federal mitigation programs. But it works. It works. And so this planning effort is intended to, look at different hazard mitigation measures that you could do that are cost effective, that will save the city money in the long run. Next slide, please. And again, the hazards themselves, we can't prevent those, but we can make a big difference through planning ahead and making smart decisions about hazard mitigation measures that can reduce some of those risks. So whether it's elevating a house in the floodplain, storm shutters for wind damage, raising utilities, these things are all small steps that you could take that in the long run can have a big return on investment and the overall quality of life in the community. So the Disaster Mitigation Act was passed in 2000, and it continued a state requirement, or a federal requirement, for states to have hazard mitigation plans in place as a condition of disaster assistance. It established a new requirement for local municipalities to also have a hazard mitigation plan in place as a condition of hazard mitigation project grants. And that's key. It's not talking about post-disaster funding from FEMA. It really is limiting the federal carrot at the end of the stick, if you will, of the mitigation project grant eligibility, as opposed to all of disaster response. It incorporates, asks communities as part of their planning efforts to incorporate the latest data and technical information, including things like the 2018 State Hazard Mitigation and Climate Adaptation Plan. So one of the things that this plan update for Revere will incorporate is the state's, an assessment of climate change for the various hazards. Next slide, please. So they're developed to meet the requirements of DNA 2000. They're implemented on an ongoing basis. FEMA requires that they're updated every 5 years, and that they address, at a minimum, natural hazards in the community. And as Erin and Elle both mentioned before, stakeholder input is critical to the update of Revere's existing hazard mitigation plan. It's never intended to have planners like us work in a bubble to present a document to the community. It really involves, our input, the city's input, state agency input, and public and other key stakeholders in the community to come up with a document that represents the best path forward for the city. So building resilience through mitigation planning. It's an ongoing commitment at the local level to implement the projects that are in the plan, right? FEMA doesn't want the document to kind of sit on a shelf and get dusty. They like to see what Revere has been doing for the last several years since you first adopted a hazard mitigation plan several years back. And that's that you're constantly looking at it, implementing the actions that are in it, keeping it updated regularly, and using it as a way to, kind of inform activities across multiple departments in the city, just the day-to-day way that the city operates. And it involves striking a balance between competing constraints, obviously, of things that everyone might like to do in a utopian sort of situation, with the constraints of how many people are really there to implement things. So staffing, time, and local funding being a key. So it's often, striking a balance between those competing constraints. Next slide, please. So the benefits, this plan, it costs money to do, the projects in it cost money to do. The benefits of doing them will far exceed the costs. And one of the main reasons to do that is this By having a plan in place, that's the first step toward being eligible to apply to FEMA for the various hazard mitigation project funding streams that they have. Without the plan, or if you have a plan that's expired, a municipality would not be eligible to apply for all of that grant funding. So this is really, keeping this plan maintained has a great benefit to the city. Under some funding streams, not only the post-disaster kind of stuff under FEMA's 404 program, but things like the new BRIC program, which has millions of dollars nationwide available. So it really is, again, the path to resiliency and developing strategies and projects to reduce risk and have things that are on the shelf. So that way, in a post-disaster situation, when the state is, at a minimum, the state is saying, send us your letters of intent, what projects are in the pipeline? What projects would you like to be putting in grant applications for? Things are on the shelf, they're ready to go, and those notifications can go out, and they're doing so with the benefit of the municipality having more information at its disposal and time to process the data, chew on things, get input from the public, get input from other stakeholders, and really develop. And in this case, since it's a plan update, it's tweaking what has been proposed so that the mitigation strategy that's in the plan is current. We'll take a look at what actions the city has completed, get those off the list. Look at new actions that weren't thought of before that can get put on the list, and then update the status of things that are kind of ongoing. Next slide, please. So again, some of the kinds of projects that where grant funding is available for hazard mitigation projects through FEMA, things like structure acquisition, elevation and flood proofing, relocation. You could have road raising projects, culvert upgrades, bridge retrofits, things to protect utility system. I mean, it's a wide range of projects, and there's differences between the different FEMA programs, where the cap is as far as how much a project could be, what's the maximum project dollar amount that they would fund. And there are subtle differences from year to year in the like annual funding appropriations as far as what specific types of projects are not only eligible, but some years they'll prioritize a certain type over another. But again, it's a wide range of projects that could offer significant benefits to the city. Next slide, please. And again, by keeping the plan current and doing these regular five-year updates, it makes sure that the plan still represents present day conditions, present day understanding of vulnerabilities, and that the plan continues to represent what the city would like to see and do going forward for when these events do occur, because they will keep happening, and with climate change, they're likely to keep on happening a little more frequently and often more intensely. So it really underscores the importance of a project of this, a planning project of this nature. Next slide, please. So the current plan that the city has in place was last updated in 2015. It was initially prepared in 2005. So the city has done a great job. One of the, I started doing these plans in 2003. And at that time, local municipalities that were preparing plans were really, on the leading edge in 2005. There were several years after the act was passed where things were kind of slow going on, and it wasn't off until, I would say, around maybe closer to 2010 until you'd say you had a lot of municipalities covered. So it's great that Revere started as early as they did, and they've had, 15 years of the ability to apply for these different project grants. The 2015 update looked at varying hazard areas and development trends. This update that we're working on now, I mentioned quickly before, it's including an assessment of climate-based impacts to align with what was presented in the 2018 Massachusetts State Hazard Mitigation Plan. And like I said before, it will include a review and discussion of previous hazard mitigations and identify new hazards and measures for moving forward. So the current plan has in it an assessment of 12 overall hazards. 4 were assessed but deemed not to be significant enough of a threat to include in the document. Things like drought, landslide, brush fire, extreme temperatures. But 8 have been reviewed and assessed to be significant for inclusion in the plan. They are flooding, coastal hazards, hurricanes, winter storms, tornadoes, earthquakes, and tsunami. Next slide, please. Okay, group discussion, where we would like to get your feedback is regarding notable occurrences of hazards in Revere since the 2015 was last prepared. And we'd like to open this up for discussion and get feedback from anyone in our virtual room here about things that have happened recently and the kinds of impacts that those events may have had on you or your neighborhood.
Thanks, Anna. And I just wanted to add to that, this is one of the opportunities where you'll get a break from hearing us talk to you and have an opportunity to hear from the stakeholders. This is really getting at trying to understand what's happened in the last 5-6 years since the last update was done. Think 2018 nor'easters, some of the significant winter storms that we've had, or some localized flooding issues that have happened. This is an opportunity for us to hear from people who have been living it and experiencing it. We have our sources that we can get that information from. The city that we've been working closely with has provided a lot of good information from us, but we just wanted to pause here and then open up for discussion for folks who are participating tonight to share with us their experiences over the last 5 or 6 years. And Elle, I don't have the opportunity to see.
I'm gonna start calling on people. Oh, here we go.
Great.
We have Bob O'Brien, our fearless leader.
Do you have his hand raised?
Go right ahead, Bob.
Perhaps belabor the obvious, but clearly the persistence of flooding in the riverfront area, particularly in the case of severe storms that occur and coincide with high tides, is a major problem, but obviously nothing new. Secondly, there has been a lot of beach erosion and beach scouring in some places. I live down the southern end of the beach, and I think most of the sand that was put there is now up around Point of Pine someplace. But there's been a lot of erosion and scouring that I think is probably contributing to some problems. And I don't know the number, but on at least a few occasions during the past 15 years, some of our major transportation infrastructure has been flooded. Route 1A, Route 107, occasionally the Blue Line, and that also has the tremendous effect of isolating the city or sections of the city from each other, which have their own public safety and public health issues. But those are the ones that come to mind.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Frank, I know you're ready to jump in.
Well, the biggest memory that comes to my mind was the tornado of 2015 that wreaked havoc on the center of the city, coming right down Broadway from the Chelsea line all the way down to Revere Street and then heading out to the marsh. Devastated storefronts, telephone poles, signs, trees along its disastrous path. that was something we were not prepared for. And a lot of people were left homeless as a result of that. We had situations where houses were totally demolished next to a house that was freestanding and not a mark on it. So it's a strange animal, tornadoes, and that was our first experience in dealing with that. I'm sure Fire Chief Bright can chime in on the devastation that caused throughout the city.
Yeah, July 28th, 2014. Quite a day.
Yeah, yeah. And
Luckily, no loss of life, though. No loss of
Yes,
life for
that
that
was-
storm, but that was just by the grace of God, really.
that was a miracle, yeah.
That was certainly a crazy warning to have on your cell phone coming up, and it just didn't seem real. It didn't. It was like this can't be right. This can't be for Revere. But we do have those warning systems, which are pretty unique these days as well.
Indeed, indeed.
Some other disasters we have to deal with, and Chief Bright can chime in on this, is we're surrounded by quite a bit of marshland in the city and high marsh grass and phragmites. And we're next to the rail lines, which causes sparks and ignites those phragmites. And under heavy windy conditions, it can be real challenging for our fire department to deal with those brush fires, as they're very close to houses and neighborhoods. So, I mean, Chief Bright could probably add to that, having probably fought many of those himself, how difficult that can be for our firefighters.
Yeah, the brush fires are a big challenge. You know, of course, as land's more valuable and more scarce, we've populated those areas more and more, I think. So when we get a fire, we've had fires. We had one down on Loring Road this year that, started out as a fire in the backyard. Basically, someone, I think, discarded a cigarette by the marsh, and it ended up, burning a house, catching the house next door and burning a lot of property, a few sheds in the back of the fence. So they burn fast, they burn furious, and they are a major challenge, in a city like Revere, where we have neighborhoods that are basically, surrounded by the phragmites. So
Yeah. So wind conditions add to that, and being a coastal community, heavy winds prevailing from the northeast, especially along the oceanfront neighborhoods, cause devastation with trees and power lines. And that becomes challenging for our power companies and our emergency response staffs also, and DPW dealing with the downed trees. But those are natural hazards, disasters that you really don't think about because they occur all the time. And I mean, I think this is something this plan is designed to prevent, is not to prevent them, but to respond to those quicker and minimize the damage caused by those kind of disasters. And as Bob O'Brien stated, our community interior flooding is almost occurring on a monthly basis now with storms, more so than it did back in 2015 and 2005 when this report was started. So we're responding to more flooding events and pumping out more than we did before. So it's only going to get worse. So that's why this plan is so important.
And the Route 1A resiliency study that was completed by the MPO, there are a number of recommendations coming out of that plan, which should be finalized and presented officially to the MPO for approval in the next coming weeks, probably about a month from now. I think April 1st is their presentation. So once we have that finalized report, we'll have those recommendations as well. It does touch upon a number of things Frank mentioned in regards to the phragmites and on the either side of Route 1A for mitigation along that corridor, which we know was closed in 2018, which cut off thousands of residents in the Point of Pines, Riverside, and beach area with Revere Beach Boulevard flooded and closed, as well as Route 1A flooded and closed. So we were very lucky to get the attention of the MPO to do that study and to be involved in that along with Mass DOT. So we actually were able to obtain some regional flood mapping, which really shows that that whole area, that corridor along 1A is heading towards being flooded. Mills Ave is being flooded now at king tides, sometimes at high tides. So we're seeing that as a more frequent event, and that's only going to increase with sea level rise and climate change. So I'm really excited to see everybody at the table tonight and everyone that's been doing so much work reviewing the documents and getting us set up in the plans that we've initiated so far that we can fold into this, because it's actually happening now. I mean, it's crazy to think that we had a tornado, but the flooding that we are having is increasing in frequency. And I'm sure that Chief Bright can attest to that, and Paul Agenzio with having his DPW crew out cleaning up the trees for the high winds and flooding, and when the sand comes over the wall, and then having to clean up all the sand from the roadways for safety purposes. We also didn't touch upon, but Beachmont is obviously a very high priority as well. And even though it was mentioned that that hadn't been considered in the MVP, that's because the funding for that particular area is going to need a little, it's a higher rate of funding than the MVP would offer. So having this designation with our HMP plan opens us up to federal funding, which could help in that area as far as resiliency building.
I can say since 2015, city has a lot of drainage improvement projects in the pipeline, and we've completed quite a few. It's helped our interior stormwater drainage systems. Not really associated with coastal flooding, but stormwater from heavy rainfall events. Since we're a low-lying community and we're controlled by the tides, when we do get heavy rains and coinciding high tides, there's really no place for our systems to drain. So those improvements are ongoing. We have more in the pipeline that are in the planning stages now. So we've made some great strides since 2005 when this plan was first designed. I'd just like to add that.
If I could just add to what Frank said, one of the major projects in that regard was the excavation of the Eastern County ditch, which was a major drainage facility for most of the eastern side of Revere, and it's had a tremendous impact. As Frank has indicated, there are other ditches and other drainage improvements in the works, but I think that had such a dramatic effect, if you ask DPW and others, that it's worth noting. There are two other things I would note on the development side. Since 2015, a great deal of our waterfront has been developed, and I think it's worth noting that and perhaps monitoring what effect that has on resiliency, for better or for worse, as we move forward. The other development issue is the ongoing redevelopment of Suffolk Downs, and the reason I mention that is they began with a blank slate and were able to design resiliency features into their basic infrastructure, utilities, and other plans from the ground up, and perhaps even more importantly, from the ground down. And it might be worth considering what lessons we can learn. As was noted earlier, we're not beginning with a blank slate in Revere generally, but there they did, and how that gets developed from a resiliency and environmental perspective, I think is worth noting and probably worth monitoring.
Excellent point, Bob. I know that they've done a lot of work and put a lot of effort into their resiliency efforts in that area. So I think there will be a lot to be learned as things are implemented.
I'd like to say building construction resiliency standards have been increased, and it's become more restrictive now for building in the flood zones, and we're incorporating resiliency planning and design within these buildings. So as Bob stated at Suffolk Downs, every building that'll go up there will be planned with resiliency in terms of prevention flooding for a 100-year flood event and greater, to a standard, what we call Standard Project Nor'easter, which is the most impactful storm that we can think of right now. If it ever hit the city, it would devastate the city much worse than the 100-year storm of 1978. And we're incorporating those design standards and resiliency standards in Waterfront Square. That's being, those buildings that are going up along the beachfront. So it's an important part of hazard mitigation is instituting resiliency measures within construction that's ongoing with these buildings in the 100-year floodplain.
It's also worth noting that we're doing that because of the FEMA floodplain maps, which, by the way, since 2015, have been redrawn to essentially create more flood exposure. So in a sense, that documents, at least in FEMA's perspective, that we are naturally moving in the wrong direction in some respects. But the FEMA map, I think it's 2016, Frank?
Yes,
certainly
2016.
2015.
I also want to just mention briefly, perhaps one of the most aggressive resiliency recommendations that have been made in the past decades is the recommendation for the Saugus River floodgate. And although that project was on the table, I want to say 28 years ago-ish, a lot of work was put into that, a lot of research and a lot of collaboration between 5 cities and towns, and that would ultimately protect acres and acres of riverfront and marshland. It's not just a floodgate, it also carries with it many other mitigations in each community. Marsh restoration and other natural solutions as well. So we have begun to revisit that. We have submitted an application for a 7001 Army Corps of Engineers feasibility study to take that those plans off the table and to revisit them. We've also submitted an application to start a regional watershed working group for Revere, Saugus, Lynn, Malden, and Everett. And all 5 communities signed on to that application for the feasibility study, as well as for the working group application, which was just submitted last week to MAPC under their Accelerating Resiliency grant. So we're making progress on many different fronts. We hope to gain some more traction as this plan comes to fruition, and we're able to apply for some federal funding to fund some of the bigger problem areas that require more expensive pump stations and drainage in order to protect our residents. Anyone else want to join in? Any last comments before we move on?
I would
All
just,
right, I'll turn it back to you.
maybe, Elle, sorry, just to
Yeah.
add one thing, which is I sense since 2015 a higher level of awareness of the issues and opportunities that we're facing here. It reminds me in some ways of pedestrian advocacy. 15, 20 years ago in traffic planning, if somebody mentioned pedestrians, people looked at you like you were a little strange. And now nobody would think about doing any transportation planning without pedestrians and bicyclists and multimodal elements in mind. And I think we are now reaching that point with regard to resiliency. It was certainly evident in the planning for Suffolk Downs. It was certainly evident in the planning for the Riverfront Master Plan. I mean, one wouldn't think about doing economic or community planning these days without taking resiliency into account. And that's a big change, worth noting.
It is a
That's
big
important.
change. It's a very big change, and I think having the facts behind the actual real predictions of where we're going to be in 2030, 2050, and 2070, and 2100, when we layer in the actual predictions and what those areas might look like if no action is taken from today going forward, we realize that a lot of that area will be underwater. And if we don't take strides to mitigate that situation, we're gonna have some real problems.
Elle, can I just add one thing? I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but the other thing that has changed is insurance rates are starting to go up on the coast, in Revere included, and it might be worth starting to measure that as kind of a surrogate for the actual and potential costs of not paying attention to resiliency.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Bob.
This is Aaron again. Just one question before we move on for Chief Bright. It sounds like there may be some records for, past events or kind of frequency of some of those brush fires and things of that nature. Is that something that we can follow up with you directly or via Frank or Elle, the documentation of some of the frequency or some of the times of those particular events, I think would be of value to fold into the update.
I'm sure we could. Absolutely.
Super.
Aaron, you might have to take one of those out of the gray area and pull it into the yellow area. I noticed brush fires is up there.
Right. And I think this was intended to show kind of where things were put in buckets in the current plan. And I think based on what we're hearing, some of these are going to be moving and being applicable and items of more concern for the 2021 update.
And the other thing we moved was extreme temperatures. We're moving that from the 2015 bucket of not a significant threat into considering it a significant hazard.
Yep.
Where we're having temperature, increased temperature for longer periods of time and residents that are not able to escape that heat island effect.
I can say, if I may, just I've seen a real, like, seems like the past 5 years the storms have really like cranked up. The weather is just severe frequently. You never saw it. You might not see a storm like that maybe every 10, 20 years or so, but now it just seems like the frequency of them and the severity it has my attention, especially particularly the flooding and the sea level.
And with each storm, the precipitation has increased. So our annual rate of precipitation has increased dramatically. I think Aaron has a slide a little bit later on in this presentation. So that, obviously overwhelms our current capacity for flood storage in the midst of these crazy storms, in the midst of high tides. So we're getting crushed at every angle.
We don't get the snow like we used to. It's all rain or severe flooding. And, it seems like we stay warmer on the coast where we are, and that leads to more rain. And it's just, I think a snow event, eventually things melt and they flood into the waterways, but it's just, it seems like by that point, everything's been adjusted to handle it, but now it's an onward rain event that just inundates the whole area.
To amplify Frank's point about the wind, and I might be influenced by the last couple of days, but my anecdotal experience has been we've had a lot more wind events without storms. I mean, just very much windier days, whether it rains or not. And I just seem to notice that more along the coast than I have in the past.
Thanks, Bob. All right, Aaron, I'm going to turn it back to you and your team. And if anyone has anything that comes up, just feel free to raise your hand. We'll engage in conversation.
Thank you. So the current plan has a series of 43 actions, the 2015 plan, that were grouped by hazard priority for things like flooding, multi-hazard events, fire, winter storms, wind, geologic, drought, and extreme temperatures. So all of the hazards that were assessed in the plan had one or more mitigation actions proposed to address them. That said, there was an overwhelming focus on flooding, and that was important because that is one of the biggest hazards in Revere. Next slide, please. So members of this planning team for the update include people who participated in the development of the plan in 2015, various community leaders, neighborhood groups, nonprofits, regional and local development agency representatives, and won't go through every bullet that's on the screen, but the point is that the document that exists and the one that is being prepared now have a lot of input from many different parties who are able to offer unique expertise in the different areas that the plan addresses to make sure that this document continues to be, and the update is a very informed document, and that it includes, that it's as good as it can be. It's the best document that can be prepared, and that does require, a lot of heads sitting around the table in cases just like we're doing tonight for that to happen. So thanks everybody for participating and for being here. Next slide, please. Again, why is stakeholder engagement important? I think I may have actually jumped ahead with what I was saying and covered most of what's on this slide here. Sorry about that. But it does. Plans that are developed with the participation of a very wide range of organizations and stakeholders allow you to make sure that the actions that are proposed are continually applicable. They have great value with feasible projects and lead to a comprehensive plan. Next slide, please. Stakeholders in the previous plan and in this plan update that we're working on now are invited to attend meetings like the one here tonight, provide feedback on hazards like we just did, past occurrences, the damages that have occurred when those events have happened in the past, and also ideas on potential future damages. There's a lot that we can do in our shop in the office with running different programs to look at what are potential future damages like. But what's also important is if any of you have feedback on what are things that you see that are kind of maybe things that haven't happened yet, so they're not going to be documented anywhere when we go looking through various online sources, or but things that are kind of the accident waiting to happen. What is that problem that we haven't seen happen yet, but it's just kind of out there lingering as something that might happen? Because incorporating those kinds of assessments from you, it can make sure that we get everyone thinking about potential projects to address that. Does it make sense to look at any of those things now and plan ahead, get actions to address them in the plan? So areas in need of mitigation and potential actions to address those. And we also invite stakeholders to review and comment on the draft document when it becomes available. Next slide, please. So this is just I guess it's not really a short list, it's a pretty long list of other stakeholders that are being invited to participate in the process, ranging from, neighborhood groups, academic institutions, state and federal government offices, etc. And I think this is the last slide that I have, and I think we transfer things over to Aaron now. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Anna. So now we just wanted to give you a snapshot of where we are in the current update. So now we're kind of switching gears from the 2015 plan to the current one, the 2021 that's in the works. So just wanted to share some of these highlights of what we've accomplished so far. We kicked things off toward the beginning of the year with the city. The Local Hazard Mitigation Planning Committee, which we referenced before, comprised of a lot of city staff who have been involved with the past planning efforts and other ongoing projects in the city, conducted our kickoff meeting, our first meeting with that group toward the end of January. We've been updating our list of stakeholders, initiating the outreach and engagement. Elle's really been at the helm of that and doing a great job There's a fact sheet that's been prepared. It's been posted to the city's website, working on just press release items that can be distributed to increase awareness of the plan. And then we've started looking more closely at the newer data that's available, the 2018 state plan that Anna mentioned, and looking at some of the climate change considerations, some of the new data that's available, updated information from FEMA. Bob O'Brien mentioned the updated mapping that's available since the old plan. Looking at new information that's available for coastal floods, the modeling that Elle mentioned from the state agencies, Mass DOT, looking at extreme temperature information, kind of looking at what's available now and making the best use of that. And then also we've been updating land use. It was mentioned that there's been a lot of development in Revere over the last 5 or 6 years. So we're updating the mapping that we have, acknowledging that there's new development in areas that were previously underdeveloped or undeveloped. Also refreshing the action list that was included in the old plan, and we'll be touching on that here as another discussion item soon. Updating critical facilities and infrastructure that we're going to be looking at and assessing the risk for. And started doing that vulnerability assessment, kind of like I just mentioned, pairing up those really important assets that the city has and how they are at risk potentially to the updated hazards that we have based on the latest and best available information. And then here's an overview of the overall schedule for the plan update. We're here under that second bullet item here, March. We're having our first stakeholder meeting with you all. We'll be reconvening with the local hazard mitigation planning committee in April, and we're targeting to have a draft updated hazard mitigation plan available later in that month. So by late April, early May, we hope to share a draft of the hazard mitigation plan update with everyone, and then have a meeting to discuss comments, feedbacks on the draft. And then ultimately it's submitted for state and FEMA review with the objective, hopefully, of wrapping up the reviews by June, and then it will be formally adopted by City Council once everything has gone through the review process. So we thought we'd pause before we go into our next group discussion topic, which gets into seeking feedback on the actions and strategy that will be included in this update. We've shared a lot of information with you and have heard a lot of great feedback already. But just thought we'd pause to see if you have any questions about material that you've seen. If the process is confusing or convoluted, we're here to help guide you through it, and can cover any of the topics that we addressed before. Again, if there's any clarification that's needed. So Elle, I'll let you see if there's any hands that are raised, and take a pause before we go into the next discussion activity.
No hands at the moment, Aaron. I say we move forward.
Move forward. I'm all for it. Okay. Super. So this is kind of the last, significant section of the meeting that we wanted to accomplish tonight. And we're in the process of doing this update, and part of the overall plan, it'll basically result in a new strategy for the city that is comprised of mitigation actions that the city wants to implement. And this is very important. This is, as Anna was mentioning, this is basically the toolkit for the city to prepare themselves for seeking federal funds going forward to implement these actions and these mitigation projects. So this is a very important process to kind of work through and think hard about, and kind of put together those top projects that the city feels can help reduce risk and provide benefit to the city and its residents. So the slide here that I have is kind of another way to look at the 43 actions that were included in the last update. And I talked to these to some extent earlier, but just to kind of break them down, they were organized into high priority, medium priority, and low priority actions. As I mentioned, there were 43 in total from the 2015 plan. So as part of the activities that we've conducted, we met with the local planning committee and kind of did an update, took stock of where things stand with respect to those actions. Where's project progress been made? Where have actions been completed? Perhaps there's actions that are no longer relevant. So since 2015, when the previous plan was approved, there have been a total of 13 actions that were completed. There are 9 actions that are in progress. And then for those that are either in progress or have not been completed, we looked at those with the local hazard planning committee group and kind of understood which of those the city wanted to carry forward and include in the next update going forward. So just a high level summary of some of these actions. Some of the completed actions included, the city upgraded the Winthrop Parkway floodgate. They purchased new drainage maintenance equipment, purchased new diesel pumps, updated wetland and wetland delineation database to help manage and track things for the city. And then some of those in progress actions, which will be carried over into the 2021 update, include upgrading Pearl Avenue headwall and the drain line, installing backup power, coordinating with the DCR for some land swaps, and then updating the drainage plan for the city. So there's been a lot of great progress here already made from the last plan, and some of the actions will be just automatically carried over into this update and help start the development of the strategy for this next update.
Aaron, just a quick question.
Yes.
Back to this. I'm used to charts that add down and across. This one seems to add down. I don't think it adds across. That means that there must be some projects that are dropped or some that were added. And it might be worth showing that.
Right. This is summing down. And so if you were to sum across, there are some actions that have been decided to not be included with the new update going forward. I don't have that at the ready to pull up and share, but we can pull that up and kind of, as we have the further discussions with the city, have another look at kind of breaking out those past actions for sure.
Yeah, in addition to the symmetry of adding down and across, it does suggest the things that we thought were important that aren't anymore, and the reverse of that, things we didn't think of then that we do now. And that would be instructive, I think.
Mm-hmm. Good comment. So this next slide is pretty busy, and I don't expect you to, digest everything here. The intent is to just bring to light the municipal vulnerability planning or program planning process. It's the MVP program that the state has. The city participated in this, I think back in 2018, maybe went into 2019. This was a process that I think several of the people here tonight were involved with. It was a very community-driven, consensus-driven, workshop-based process where we were looking at hazards, very similar to what we're looking at with the hazard mitigation plan, and coming up with some, vulnerabilities, some strengths, and identifying some actions to address some of those risks. And basically, we wanted to just put in a summary of some of the actions that came out of that process. The product from that planning effort is going to be integrated into this hazard mitigation plan process. There's a lot of good work done through that, very recent, very relevant for the hazard mitigation plan update. So again, we're not, starting from scratch, from nothing. There's a lot of good information that's come out of this MVP planning process that'll be, pushed right into the hazard mitigation plan. The action grant that Elle mentioned for the Riverside and Point of Pines area, that was the top priority action that came out of the MVP planning process. The city is currently moving forward with a study to look at resilience measures to help with those coastal flooding issues affecting that part of the city. So that's an example of one action that came out of the MVP planning process. That's getting some more work done out of it. So this is an opportunity to, again, revisit those actions that came through that workshop process, capture them in the hazard mitigation plan. So in addition to the MVP funding program, this is now also captured in the city's hazard mitigation plan and can also be a candidate for FEMA funding, which I think Elle mentioned or alluded to for the Beachmont area in particular. So again, there's a more detailed matrix for this. This is just a snapshot of some of the issues that came up. The city identified key hazards: flooding, extreme temperatures, hurricanes, nor'easters, winter storms were the top ones that came up through the discussions. And the actions were kind of categorized into three different groups: infrastructure, kind of the pipes, the roadways; societal, this is looking at the population groups, how they're affected; and the environmental, looking at kind of the natural resources the city has that do serve as great lines of defense against natural hazards, and what can be done to protect those. So again, this is all going to be woven into the hazard mitigation plan as part of the new strategy. And I was just working through this here over the last week or so with Elle and others at the city, trying to capture some, preliminary new actions, even before we've completed our risk assessment that will inform the development of the remainder of the strategy, and working with additional meetings with the city. There's already things that the city knows that it needs to do based on issues that it's been facing.
And Aaron, I just want to point out also that some of these are in progress. So we're making some headway, but may not have the opportunity to have the funding to complete them. So having them on the list would really put them in the realm of possibility for funding as well. So even though some might be listed, people might recognize them as some work that's in progress, and but there's still quite some way to go on them. Sorry to interrupt.
No, great clarification. So I don't know that I'll read each of these items off the list, but ranging from new pump stations to help with getting rid of the water after it comes in and floods the interior areas. Looking at the extreme heat that's become more of an issue for the city, an interest in improving and increasing the tree's canopy cover to help reduce some of the heat island effects that are facing some of the hot spots in the city. We're touching on some of this in the current MVP action grant, looking at beach nourishment, dune restoration for some of the coastal areas. Then also looking at some other drainage improvements around Route 1A. I think there's another slide here that I have with a continued list. As Elle mentioned, the recent Riverfront Master Plan had several stormwater management and resilience recommendations: installation of tide gates, a pump station, implementing stormwater management for the site. And then for that other feasibility study that I mentioned for the Pointed Pines Riverside area, looking at implementation of a beach management plan, looking at some flood protection measures. And we're currently developing some of those longer term measures that by the time this hazard mitigation plan update is complete, we should have some of those recommendations in place that we can also incorporate. So this is where, again, we're happy to hear from those who are listening in, participating in this meeting. If, I guess, to hear your reactions of what you've seen with some of the mitigation measures and actions that we've presented to you. If there's anything missing, other problems that we've talked about tonight that you feel are, need to be in the crosshairs and addressed as part of this planning process. Again, we're still doing work with the risk assessment and doing some additional mapping, and we'll continue to work on refining things. But this is a great touch point now to hear from the stakeholders such as yourselves as far as your interests and items that you think should be identified. So again, I'll pause and look to Elle to see if there's any hands raised or folks who want to speak up.
This is Paul Agenzio. I think you've done an excellent job here. I'm looking at this plan, and you've really touched upon all the important points that we've been thinking about and working on over the last few years. I think you've done an excellent job, and I look forward to seeing this to its completion. Like I said, over the years that I've been here, certain things have happened over the last couple of years that never happened before, especially that storm that kind of sealed off the city there. Every major roadway coming into the city was sealed off. So I think things have changed over the last few years, and I'm excited to see this to its completion. I think you've done a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. And one other item that we didn't touch upon that we had multiple discussions about in the MVP plan, and it was, I want to say it wasn't fully in plan state at the time, but the new Point of Pines fire station, and that is, that is an extreme hazard mitigation that's going to be a huge benefit to thousands of residents along Revere Beach Boulevard, especially with all of the new development and another 3,500 units coming to fruition over a 10-year span. All of the Point of Pines residents, all of the Riverside residents, which, as Paul mentioned, were sealed off from the city. And to our neighboring community, Lynn, we were also sealed off from them because the Linway was completely flooded. So we were really sort of on an island, if you will. So, so that's great project. That's a great project that is in the pipeline, and maybe Chris, Chief Bright, you might be able to fill us in, but I know that that's coming fairly quickly. Maybe within the next few months, they might be in demo mode. So, and then after, if you don't mind commenting, and then I'd call upon Bob O'Brien, who has his hand raised. Chief Bright?
Yes, thank you. It's a project we're very excited about. I think the thought really came to mind probably after the, the triple cyclone storm around 2016. But COVID has kind of slowed the project down this year a little bit, if you will. But we're ready. We have everything pretty much in line, and I think you're going to see the old Alden Mills station coming down within the next month or so.
Wow.
And you'll see that station being built out. And again, our timeline, I would say it'll be up and built within the next year and a half or so. And I know Bob O'Brien's been working closely with us on some of the land issues there, and I think you're gonna see that project starting to go. It's like I said, it's been a little frustrating this year because we've had a lot of other things to contend with, and the pandemic did not expedite things in that regard. But we are on track and committed, and we see the urgency in getting that project completed.
Thank you for your advocacy on that. It's living in that neighborhood, it's a huge benefit. Bob O'Brien?
Yeah, one observation and one suggestion. I agree completely with Chief Bright about the importance of the new fire station. I would also note that we are building a new DPW facility, and Paul knows a lot about this, Paul Argenzio. But if we're looking to what kind of resources and equipment and so on we need for resiliency, maybe we ought to think about what new capabilities we might be introducing with the new facility. Or if we're not thinking about them, maybe there might be some suggestions along those lines. And I think the new DPW facility is going to be equally important as well. The second point I would make is I think you've got all of the bases covered, Aaron, and I join with Paul in commending you for the work that you've done. A lot of the proposed measures are difficult to compare one to the other. They're kind of somewhat apples and oranges, but and which is fine. I think that's inevitable and appropriate. But it does occur to me as we look to new funding sources, and particularly the possibility that we'll have a federal infrastructure bill within the next several months, they always look to the state of readiness of these projects. And it might be worth, along the lines that Elle was suggesting, when we list and categorize these projects, if we could have some column that indicates their, quote, state of readiness. Presumably the infrastructure bill will favor the so-called shovel ready. I think, a lot of them are not quite there and they never are, but it would be interesting to know how close to real planning and design and engineering some of these are, so that if we do have an opportunity to get significant projects funded, we know which ones to pull off the shelf, if you know what I mean. And I think that whether it's done as part of this process or separately is kind of a relevant consideration.
Thank you, Bob. I think that will be really helpful to have it organized in such a way, much like we've been doing with the MVP project as well, and just having the list
Paul,
ready to roll.
Can I just ask Paul, with regard to the new facility, do you know to what extent things like, the new issues of climate change and resiliency are being built into that facility, if at all?
Well, well, first of all, the new facility, the new equipment that you just, alluded to that, has been purchased, will be able to house that and maintain it properly in a nice environment. The building, we're trying to make it zero ready and create our own power there with excuse me. So we're trying to be self-contained there and have a net zero building. And we're making sure the building, which lies right along the marsh itself, certainly won't be prone to flooding and protected from flooding. So we're not knocked out of the game if we do have flooding. So plans are in place for all that. And the new facility should help and certainly go a long way in helping with all these different things that we have planned.
Aaron, I would suggest that's very encouraging to hear that, Suffolk Downs, the new fire station, and the new DPW facility might be exhibits A, B, and C for how the city is looking at resiliency planning, not just for the community as a whole, but particularly for its own agencies and infrastructure.
Yeah. Paul, what's the timeline for the DPW facility?
Almost the same as the fire station. We hope to be 18 months, either ready to move in or close.
Okay, great.
We'll be going out to bid for construction probably in another month or two.
Okay.
I think it's fair to say that both of those facilities are designed differently in 2021 than they would have been in 2011.
Positively.
Yes. All right. I'd like to thank everyone for your participation and your feedback throughout the meeting. Great progress, Aaron. Thank you for pulling everything together in such a concise way to cover so many details. The fact sheet is listed up there. That is also on the website. It really just, gives an outline of what is the hazard mitigation plan and why do we need to have one, just so that it's a little bit clearer to everyone what a hazard mitigation plan means. I will tell you that we'll post the slide deck on the website, and we'll look forward to scheduling the next core team meeting with Aaron following this meeting. And that's it for the night. So I think it's a wrap. We're at about 7:23. So if no one has any additional comments, we're going to wrap up by 7:30.
I have one additional comment, Al. Have a nice vacation. You deserve it.
Thank you. I'm not rushing anybody off the meeting, just for the record. I thank you all for your participation, taking time out of your night. So if I can give you back the last 10 minutes, I'd like to do that. So thank you for your participation. Everyone have a great night. And if you do have any questions or feedback to follow, you can always email me, ebaker@revere.org. And as Bob mentioned, I will be out of the office for the next few days, but I will respond upon my return. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.